Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Percy. Satellite imagery today still showing a big plume of moisture and clouds coming up off the chart there, moving northward, Alaska Peninsula and across the southwest interior, and then taking a turn off to the northeast here around a big area of upper high pressure over the Gulf of Alaska, and that is keeping the southeast coast in the sunshine this afternoon, and pretty good conditions up along the North Gulf Coast. A lot of low clouds and fog, northern Cook Inlet into the Matanuska Valley, and clouds rolling across the central interior areas with some bands of snow back here on the western Arctic coast, and then areas of mixed precipitation down the west side there that becomes mostly just rain here from the Kuskokwim Delta down across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Farther out to the west, really nice day, light winds today and mostly clear skies, both occurring at Adak and Atka, but a little bit farther to the west, a few scattered snow showers working in towards Shemya. We're on the chart, here's that frontal position, roughly right in that area. Rainfall here along the Alaska Peninsula, real slow moving front, so the light rain had a pretty good, accumulated to about 1 1/3 inches falling at King Cove, while False Pass picked up about 88/100 of an inch, and Cold Bay 3/4 of an inch, and that area of moisture sliding northward there. St. Mary's had about 1/2 inch of precipitation, as did Cape Neuenham, and then lighter amounts up into Norton Sound. Became a little more mixed up in this area. Snow, light rain, even possibly some areas of freezing rain as well, and actually mixed even up in the Kobuk Valley there, mostly in the form of snow back to the northwest, especially along the western Arctic coast there, and then drying out behind the front. Light winds, high pressure made for the extensive fog here over northern Cook Inlet, Anchorage in toward the Matanuska Valley, persisting all day long. No winds to speak of, warm air aloft, keeping a lid on it, so very difficult to mix it out or dissipate. And that fog advisory is out for the remainder of tonight again for Anchorage and the Matanuska Valley areas. Pretty good, nice weather continues. The light winds, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, all the way down the Panhandle there. High pressure up over the Yukon. And then for tonight, not a lot of change. As I mentioned here, it stays dry over the southeast coast and mostly clear. Lower clouds on the increase here over the Gulf of Alaska, but they hopefully will remain offshore all the way around, except for Kodiak Island. Probably get into some of that during the night tonight if you haven't already, especially on the southern side of the island. And again, dense fog advisory out for the entire night tonight for northern Cook Inlet, and high pressure, light wind conditions. And that front continues to weaken, but the area of moisture continues here. So periods of light rain, but diminishing winds were today gusting 25 to as high as 50 miles an hour here across the Alaska Peninsula, right up into the southwest coast. Cape Neuenham seeing gusts 50 miles an hour earlier today. Those are already starting to trend downward. That'll continue through tonight. The rain coming a little less heavier and more intermittent, but not ending completely. Mixed precipitation through here, which includes areas of freezing rain possible, and then mostly snow here. along that batch that extends off to the northeast across the central eastern Brooks Range. And the snow will continue tonight there in the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range, but will end out toward Kotzebue Sound. Seward Peninsula looking dry. Arctic coast now a little breezy on the west side here later tonight with that approaching trough up to the northwest, but most of the snow should end and be over with here tonight with maybe a little bit of clearing. Today's pretty nice over the Aleutians. Risk of some moisture way out there to the west with that next system, which tomorrow really doesn't make much of an eastward push. Looks like most of the snow will stay west of even Shemya. So another pretty nice day here across all of the Aleutians with more light wind conditions, especially the central and eastern areas. Just a narrow band of rain or snow now for the Alaska Peninsula, and that's about it with much lighter winds. Areas of snow now, Kuskokwim Delta, or still could be mixed, especially along the entire coastline there, but mostly areas of light snow here. Again, northeastward, got high pressure building or developing here back to the west behind that, so over the Bering Sea. 1,036 millibars, another center now over the Seward Peninsula. And this area holding here, beginning to pull off to the east a little bit. And then farther out, moisture streaming northeastward here. Bring a chance of snow tomorrow to the Bering Strait and up to the northwest coast. Cutting off at about Point Lay on the western Arctic coast there. Otherwise dry through this area, Noatak Valley. And definitely a lot of dry conditions. We get little clouds and fog persisting wherever they form here over south central Alaska, probably persist throughout the entire day. And that pattern also on the increase here for the Panhandle. Start looking for some areas of low clouds and fog as well. And then it looks like tomorrow night, this system here with the upper level trough will kick eastward and bring some snow in across the central and eastern interior here. But that'll be all north of the Alaska Range and down to the south. That also will get hung up on the western Alaska Range. So there's some clouds, not expecting anything to make its way across south central Alaska in the way of snow here. And then during the afternoon, that snow will push eastward, begin to diminish here back to the west, but looks pretty snowy, occasional light snow from Northway Tok all the way up to Eagle, and then turning to flurries back toward Fairbanks. A better chance of snow there, again coming in tomorrow night and early on Wednesday. Otherwise, increase in the winds here. Outflow winds such as Resurrection Bay could get pretty gusty out of the north, and also for channeled areas of Prince William Sound. Whittier could see winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour, 45 miles per hour, and possibly the Copper River Delta. Trending upwards on the winds from northern Lynn Canal. Otherwise, the southeast coast here, light and variable for the winds through Wednesday, and that's going to allow that cloud condition, low clouds, areas of fog to develop, maybe even some drizzle thrown in there, mostly along the coastline, and then out to the west. Strong high pressure, 1,047 millibars now just south of Nunivak Island. Maybe some rain and snow showers lingering, but may end altogether here for the Alaska Peninsula, possibly over toward Unalaska and Nikolsky. And this system now tracking northward takes a turn to the east a little bit there. So gale force winds coming into the Chukchi Sea in the western Arctic coast, or 30 to 35 knot winds through here. And snow, blowing snow on the increase. Again, southern slopes of the western Brooks Range, all the way out Noatak Valley, northwest coastal areas there, back down across the western Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. It looks like this system Wednesday night will track eastward and then start to pull to the southeast on Thursday, early Thursday, and then that whole thing's going to end up dropping down into the northern southeast coast by Thursday evening or so. And it'll kind of change the entire weather pattern, end up with cold northerly flow aloft here coming across the eastern interior right into the Gulf of Alaska. That cold upper level low pulling much colder temperatures in, especially over the southern or the northern southeast coast, again late Thursday and going into Friday. Meanwhile, this system out to the west still having trouble working any precipitation in, but the gradient tight enough now, 40 knot southerly winds tomorrow, and or for Wednesday, I'm sorry. And then for temperatures today, well below zero at Tok, -12, -13 at McCarthy and Gulkana. But at Gunsight, a little higher elevation there, 21 degrees, Southeast coast here, mid-30s at Sitka. Also down at AKwx and Annette, both 34 degrees, otherwise in the 20s everywhere else, from 29 at Wrangell. 23 there at Juneau, but Skagway up to 40 above. North Gulf Coast near 20 degrees, Cordova, Valdez area. 26 north winds gusting 25 at Seward, 31 in Homer, 30s here for Kodiak Island, 9 in Kenai, 12 at Palmer, -2 this afternoon at Willow with clear skies, 6 degrees at Talkeetna. Up in the Tanana Valley, single numbers there, 1 above at Fairbanks, 24 though at Tanana, and Denali up to 29, 23 Fort Yukon, and then milder here to the west, up to 33, right around freezing. Bettles all the way over to Kotzebue there, Arctic coast near freezing, Barter Island at 20, but the north slope here well into the 30s. Umiat Airfield this afternoon, 38 degrees, 10 degrees colder though over at Point Lay, and a 26 there at Nome. Bogolivan 37, Caltag 37, Unalakleet 37. Otherwise, McGrath checked in with 32. That same temperature also recorded at Amonic and Savunga, 30 above zero, 28 at St. George, 35 there at St. Paul. Lower 40s here from Unalaska up to Cold Bay, and actually all the way up there to Pilot Point, and then down into the mid-20s for King Salmon, 30s out to the west. Low temperatures tonight, really contrasted again from east to west here. Lower to mid-30s over the Kuskokwim Delta to -20s below there for the Copper River Basin up to Northway and Tok, and then teens and 20s there across the Panhandle. And the highs for tomorrow looking about the same, mid to upper 30s here over the southwest interior, lower 40s Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, teens over the interior, and then depending on your elevation here, anywhere from 20s to maybe lower 30s, teens and 20s North Slope and Arctic coast, so expecting it to cool down here some on the North Slope, except maybe off to the east. Flying weather tomorrow morning, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, again with that boundary of clouds here, IFR there, and of course across all the southwest interior and up to Norton Sound, southern Seward Peninsula, and again the southern slopes of the western central Brooks Range. And then by tomorrow afternoon, ranges a little bit, some improvement back here up over the northwest, a narrow area of IFR right through here, and then all the west coast up across St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, looking pretty IFR, as well as over the Kilbark and Auckland Mountain areas. VFR, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula here, eastern Alaska Peninsula, up across Copper River Basin, except for the low clouds and fog in northern Cook Inlet and the Matanuska Valley, of course, making for IFR conditions there, and an increasing area of marginal stuff there right along the coast of the Panhandle back up to almost Cordova. And for passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR tomorrow, same forecast for Adigan. Lake Clark and Merrill, open again, VFR for rainy, windy, Isabel, Mentesta, looking really good. Tanita also VFR, Portage VFR, Chilkoot and White VFR. Freezing levels, upper level high now, shifting a little bit to the east here, so 8,000 feet northeast Gulf of Alaska, with that thermal ridge axis extending northward from there, just east of the border, with warmer air aloft now pushing in across the southern southeast coast. Cooler conditions back to the west. And icing, again, that persistent area of moisture with the frontal boundary, Alaska Peninsula, northeastward here, all the way up across the eastern Brooks Range area. Maybe some of that with that moisture slipping east-northeastward there to the western Arctic coast from maybe Kivalina up to Point Lay, and then some more threats way out to the west. Jet stream, here's that huge area, high pressure again, matching up with the high freezing levels. Southwest flow, 90 to 100 knots right through the interior here. Westerlies back out to the west there, kind of split right in this area. Pacific jet well to the south. Northeasterlies, 70 knots down toward the Queen Charlottes. And again, this trough comes over the top, whole ridge flattens out, redevelops farther to the west. Late in the week, northerly flow as that upper low digs into the northern panhandle. It's going to pull much colder air into the eastern interior on down across the panhandle again in the Thursday, Friday, Saturday time frame. Otherwise, 9,000 feet for tomorrow. Southwest 30 to 35 knots, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. 20 to 40 knot southwesterlies here over the interior, except Copper River Basin Panhandle just 10 knots, up to 50 knots out of the west-southwest there along the central Arctic coast. 3,000 feet, southwest 25 to 40 up there along the Arctic coast, otherwise 20 to 25 here through the interior. Really light winds south of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, Kodiak Island, around and across the Panhandle, and also light winds out here over the Bering Sea with developing area high pressure there south of the Pribilofs. But on the west side of that, southwest 40 knots out towards Shimya, westerlies 25, Bering Strait and the Chukchi Sea. Turbulence-wise, moderate chop with those strong west winds here from about Wainwright, Barrow eastward, and also back over the western areas there, just north of the Brooks Range, with light to isolated moderate chop here through the interior there. Not too bad really for the Alaska Peninsula, and then moderate below about 5,000 feet out towards Shimya and Amchitka. And after the break, Hanger Flying, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hanger Flying. Tonight we welcome back Tim Feenstra, pilot, mechanic, and entrepreneur. And if you tuned in last time, Tim's got some fascinating stories about some of the technology and aviation events he's been involved with. In fact, he was an early pioneer in unmanned aircraft, and he was talking about ghost nets, finding these ghost nets out in the Pacific, and the feasibility of using unmanned aircraft to do it. So Tim, welcome back.
Thank you, Harry.
So it makes, I think, obvious sense to have a small unmanned aircraft, if that can do the job, over a 4-engine Navy aircraft or former Navy aircraft. How easy was it to get the approval to do that?
Well, that was the hard part. The whole unmanned aircraft, or as they're now known as drones, that whole world was new. And it wasn't that long ago. We're talking, we started the process of getting FAA approval, I believe, in 2006 or 2007. And what the FAA was issuing back then was what they call a COA, Certificate of Authorization. NOAA had never been through this process. They, at that point, did not have a program yet set up for unmanned aircraft. So our aircraft, which we were calling the Resolution, was the first aircraft that they actually had gone through the approval process. Months and months of paperwork, but paperwork being generated because nobody knew what to do. So let's just cover all the bases and do everything, even if it doesn't make sense.
I'll tell one quick story. I was involved, as you know, in unmanned aircraft with the Department of the Interior. Very first COA that we put in took 18 months to get it approved. And by the time it was approved, the guy who proposed it and was going to fly it had retired.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what were some of the unusual requirements that were levied on you, like radio calls and things like that?
Okay, so one of them was medical certificates. Anybody that was involved had to have a third-class medical certificate, which is the equivalent of your student pilot license when you get it. That meant anybody that even touched the aircraft. So this aircraft we launched from the boat on a launcher. It's a little electric power flying wing, about a 2.5 meter wingspan. But we would land it in the ocean. It was a waterproof airframe. And then some NOAA guys would go out there in a little boat and they would pick it up and then bring it back to the ship. Everybody that went out in that boat was required to have a third-class medical, which obviously didn't make any sense. The other is we were operating 1,000 miles north of the Hawaiian Islands, and the FAA claimed that airspace and said we had to clear the airspace on a Unicom frequency. So we said, well, we'll do 122.8. And before we would fly, we had to make an announcement if there's any general aviation aircraft flying in the vicinity of nowhere, we're going to be commencing unmanned aircraft operations. So some of it was ridiculous, but we also understood that it was a process. And that process has been refined and is much easier to go through today than it was 8 years ago.
Well, I can't imagine anybody answering those calls in the blind.
We didn't get any response. I was surprised.
Well, my hat's off to you. You're a real pioneer and Alaska pioneer at that, and your efforts in the early days were spectacular. And you're right. People today, with the FAA's finally come around, and they just have no idea what it was like just 5 or 6 years
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
So, One of the things you talked about was, I think, one of your latest efforts, the optionally piloted aircraft. Now, we're not going to have time to finish this discussion, but let's get started. Talk a little bit about that option.
With the advancements in computers and remote sensing equipment, everything getting smaller, tinier, faster as far as processing power, the whole drone, small unmanned aircraft world has just exploded in the last 10 years. And it has opened up new avenues or new ways of doing things. But what it's almost left behind is some things that manned aircraft can also do and sometimes do better. So we're seeing sort of another market, a middle-of-the-road market, where it's called an optionally piloted aircraft. So we're back into a full-size aircraft, but one that could be flown by a pilot, or potentially the pilot steps out, flips the switch, and the aircraft goes off autonomously to do the flight.
So you mentioned something that was that I really appreciated, and that is you could have a pilot on board, and therefore the questions of safety and airspace and wouldn't really be a factor. But the machine could actually probably fly the mission better.
Yes, so one of the problems that everyone's running into with the COAs is getting the airspace permission to fly with the small unmanned aircraft or the drones. But the manned aircraft doesn't have that problem. So as long as you're flying with the national airspace rules, you can fly as a natural manned aircraft would fly, but the aircraft is under autonomous or fancy autopilot control at that point. So your flight lines are perfect, the triggering of your sensors, your cameras is perfect. So while the aircraft is doing it autonomously, it's still being manned, and you've got that safety person, eyes outside the cockpit, and the safety of if there's a problem, you've got a pilot that can flip a switch and take over as well.
So one last question, can I log PIC time?
Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
Tim, thanks for being on again. I want to get you back yet one more time because we got some more things to talk about.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. We'll get Tim back on to talk about some pretty fascinating flying adventures. Until then, fly safe.
Welcome back. Big changes in the sea ice here. A real reduction along the southwest coast here. In fact, almost no discernible ice around Nunivak Island and none here for St. Lawrence Island. And those southerly winds have possibly poked through the Bering Strait here to Diomede Island areas, and also really thinning out here on the southern Norton Sound zone. And the heavier ice now along the coast doesn't look like what's come on shore is probably about it, and there aren't any expected additional ice shoves that'll take place here. And moving on to the marine forecast, southeast, really light, actually variable 10 knots or less, with seas down to 3 to 5 feet here along the coast. And then for Wednesday, northern Lynn Canal coming up to 25 knots, and that's going to be sort of a increasing trend that could really increase toward the end of the week. Otherwise, light winds continue for tomorrow here out along the coast. Those seas down to 3 to 4 feet. And for Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, light winds tomorrow. Westerlies, 20 knots, North Gulf Coast, small craft advisories for the Barrens, 15 knots for Kodiak. Wednesday's outlook, 15 knots still for Kodiak Island, small craft advisories, the Barrens, western North Gulf Coast there, but staying light for Prince William Sound, except much higher gusts like safe through Passage Canal out of the west, and light winds for northern Cook Inlet. Bristol Bay tomorrow, south 25 knots, otherwise 20 knotters here for the peninsula, as in Alaska Peninsula, and 15 knots from Castle Cape to Sitkinak. And then a reversal in the wind direction here coming up for Wednesday, and much lighter, high pressure developing back to the west-southwest. Flow around that north to northeast, 10 to 15 knots here, maybe up to 20 knots on the Pacific side of the peninsula. And then for the Aleutians, tightening gradient, 40-knot gales here, mostly west of probably Kiska Island. Small crafts up until you get to Adak. Light winds again tomorrow there, southeast 15. Light winds all the way over to the Fox Islands, but becoming north and northeast. And for Wednesday, east-northeast winds, 15 to 20 knots for the eastern Aleutians. Now we've got small craft advisories, southeasterlies for the Adak and Atka, gradually increasing and holding at 40 knots. More southeast, though, for the far western Aleutians. Southwest coast, southern Nunivak Island, 20-knot winds west 15 north of the island, south at about 20 or south-southwest St. Lawrence Island, about the same for St. Matthew. Really light winds tomorrow with that area high pressure taking over for the Pribilof seas down to 5 or 6 feet. And that also holds through Wednesday, and southwest to northwest there for the coast 15 to 20. Small craft advisories, St. Lawrence Island back down to and west of St. Matthew Island. Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories for the eastern coast. Gales southwest 35 knots tomorrow all the way down here to Cape Beaufort, and then brisk wind advisories there on down to the Bering Strait. And for Wednesday, gales also 35 to 40 knots here for the western areas up to Cape Beaufort. Brisk wind advisories the western coast, 20-knot winds from the central coast all the way over to Demarcation Point. And for tonight, again, this area of persistent moisture through this area. Rain in the south becoming mixed. Could be some areas of freezing rain in through here that actually extend up into possibly the Kobuk Valley, and then mostly snow off to the northeast. So the whole thing's shifting eastward. High pressure control southern Alaska, dense fog advisory, Anchorage, Palmer, Matanuska Valley through tonight. Light winds for the Panhandle. And for tomorrow, high pressure developing back to the west. That's going to eventually shove this system eastward. Not so much tomorrow, but by tomorrow night and early Wednesday, pretty good area of snow. Light snow will be pushing eastward across the Tanana and upper Yukon Valley. As high pressure builds into the southwest, a stronger system coming across the Chukchi Sea with snow and blowing snow associated with that. And otherwise, a little breezier, no fog for Cook Inlet for Wednesday, and the next storm approaches the western Aleutians.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.